Hi, Erica here with Freetown Farm at Community Ecology Institute. We are going to be talking about container vegetable gardening today, and I'm very happy to have a fantastic dear friend of the farm. His name is Gary Pilarczyk, and he has an incredible YouTube channel that he grows just about everything, I think, here in Maryland, Zone 7. But I definitely recommend that you check him out. But he was so kind enough to come down here with us today and help us talk about how you can grow food in containers. I know most of us, especially here in the inner Columbia area, have much smaller spaces to grow. So here at Freetown Farm, we really want to support you as a new grower and teach you how to do it right the first time, so that all you need to do is care for it and then, reap your fantastic bounty from caring for your plant. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I have a few options here. We're going to plant tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and beans. Those are generally what you find in a kitchen garden. It's definitely what I grow and Gary grows. But we wanted to just kind of talk about what you need to get started, and then show you how to plant it up, and then we'll talk to you about watering, fertilizing, and harvesting. So for a tomato plant, well, first let me back up and talk about sun situation. That's what I like to call it. Certain plants do well in certain conditions, and sun is one of those conditions that's very important. So you want to make sure that you have enough sun to grow the plant that you want to grow. For the most part, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, beans, most of your what we consider warm weather vegetables, like to have at least 6 or more hours of sun per day. So if you're really interested in doing that, and unfortunately you don't have that amount of sun, not to worry, there are other things that you can grow. But we're going to primarily focus on food crops in a full sun situation. Okay. Secondly, you want to think about the plant that you're growing and the amount of space that it needs to grow. Each plant has a different capacity or root ball that it needs to be able to fully flourish. So Gary, if you don't mind, can you talk to us a little bit about the different types of containers that we could use, and then what plant does well in that size?
Yeah, so gallon-wise, this is your standard paint bucket, or if you go to bakeries or grocery stores, you can ask for these buckets. They're food grade. They hold about 5 gallons worth of soil, and that's kind of what you want minimum for maybe your pepper plants. Mm-hmm. When you get to your cucumbers over here and your tomato plants, you want to go into really the 10-gallon to the 20-gallon range, because like you were saying, that root ball, even though the plant's little today, it's going to get huge and it's going to fill up the entire space. So this is great for peppers. That's a good size for cucumber, tomato, and that's the best way to really do it.
Yeah, and also certain plants have a growing, I guess I would say, limit. Determinant is one, and that's a plant that's going to kind of grow to a set height, put out all its fruit, and then be done for the season. And definitely for tomatoes. And for the most part, that tomato might get 3 feet at most. So it's a nice variety of tomato to plant when you do have a small space, because it's not going to take up all of your entire growing space that you have.
So like if this is actually an indeterminate variety, which will grow 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet tall, so it's going to continue. So this tomato plant would need the bigger type container. If you're growing a determinate variety, like you said, it gets about 3 feet or 4 feet, you could grow that in the 5-gallon bucket. So, and the way you figure it out is you just look at, sometimes the label will have it, or you just look up the name of the tomato on the internet and it'll tell you what it is. Yeah,
you just want to make sure that I tell all new gardeners, know your plant. Know what you want to grow, but then do some research on that plant so that you know that you can provide for exactly the conditions that it needs to thrive. Another thing we want to talk about is make sure that your container has holes in the bottom. These containers are filled already, so I won't be able to show you, but I guarantee you there are holes here. We put about 10 or so in a container this large. This is a fabric pot, which is a really great option. It doesn't need holes because it's made of a material that lets water just drain all the way through. So it's a really great option for container growing. And Gary, if you want to talk about root pruning, what you know about that, I know that these are really well known for that.
Well, a couple of things too. I just want to show you, this one has holes up here, and that's a really good idea. If you're growing in containers or you're on a balcony or you're in a place like today, it's really hot. July is really hot here in Maryland. This will create a little bit of a water reserve, but the excess water above it will pour out. And the reason you have a water reserve is so that when you're in the middle of July, your tomato plants, your pepper plants, or whatever you're growing are going to really pull water out of your soil. So you don't have to just put the holes on the bottom. You could raise it, usually about 2 inches to here, and that creates a nice little water reserve.
And I got to tell you, I have a small space growing area, and I primarily use these fabric pots here and these 5-gallon buckets, and I've had no issues. It's been a really good option for me.
So, and then basically anything that's plastic or metal, they're the same type of container. This is a fabric pot, and roots will actually grow into the fabric and come out of the fabric. I don't know what this looks like. Okay, it's hard to see here, but when you have plastic, what happens is the roots start coiling around, and they will coil inside of here, they will coil inside of here, and then the plant can become root bound. And it can impact, if you're using too small of a container, it can impact the growth of the tomato plant. When you grow in the fabric pots, the roots actually come out the side of the fabric, the air dries them and they get pruned, and they don't coil inside. And you get a really nice, massive, fibrous root ball, and your plants tend to do better in the fabric type pots.
Yeah, they work really well. All right, so we've talked about our sun, we've talked about container types. Now let's talk about our soil. Now, it's very important that you don't use soil from your backyard. You don't want to go dig up what we have that,
It's too heavy.
way too heavy. The roots just won't be able to move through it. It's just too dense for a container plant. So there are lots of container mixes on the market. There's too many to mention, but I typically, because I do a lot of gardening, I make my own, and I make just a mix, a 50-50 mix of a just natural potting soil or potting mix, and then another 50% of compost. And that's pretty much the base of my potting mix soil. Sometimes I put worm castings in there, it kind of depends on my mood. But for the most part, that's good. The peat that's in the potting mix has a nice water absorption capabilities as well as compost. Compost also has soil life that you find in native soil that you will not find in a bagged potting mix, and you will not find it just in a container. You want to add that. So compost, a nice potting mix, and you're good to go. So 50-50 mix there.
And this is really good. So if you're just starting, like I know here you have tons of compost, which is beautiful, but you can't always get it real easily. So if you're just starting, any potting mix from the store is really going to work. It has that peat moss you were talking about. It's going to hold water. If you're able to add in the compost, that's great, but to get started, you don't need that. You just want to make sure you pick up potting mix, and that's what it's going to say on the bag. And I'm just stressing it because that's kind of the mistake people make, is they don't put in the right starting or container mix into here, and it just dries out too fast. But your potting mix will hold water, and your plants will love you for it.
So are we ready to plant up some yummy veggies?
Yeah. Do you put in granular first or after?
I typically will put in a granular slow release fertilizer. There's plenty on the market. You can use organic or chemical. I know there's sometimes
organic is best. If you're in a pinch, we'll talk about chemical fertilizers another day, but the organic fertilizers are perfect.
Yep.
You have one.
Yes, I don't know how you pronounce that, Jobies or Jobs.
Yep.
But it's just any organic slow release granular. It'll say granular. You'll be able to tell because you can shake it, and there's bits. It's not like a powder.
Yeah, we'll talk about the water soluble too with the fish emulsion. But your granular type fertilizers, your organic fertilizers, they usually all have basically the same stuff: blood meal, bone meal, chicken manures, some other things. So whatever's on sale, whatever's organic, that's perfect. And you're just going to set your soil up just like this.
All right, so what I do is make a well here, and with tomatoes, you can plant them fairly deep. It helps to develop a much stronger root system when you do that. And I just put like a couple of tablespoons or so.
2 tablespoons is great.
And mix that in. Oh! And we've got our tomato here. I honestly don't know what variety it is other than it being indeterminate. So we're just going to put it in and see.
And then like for most plants, you plant right at the same level that it's in the pot, so right to here. But with the tomato plant, because it's a vine, you plant it up the vine like a couple of inches.
Yeah.
It will root out from that vine too, so you can plant your tomato plant a little bit deeper and it'll do really well for you.
Now, this is a nice large container for this tomato, and I can actually plant my beans in this as well, because the beans, while this tomato is going to grow much, much taller, the beans are only going to grow to 18 inches or so.
And these are bush beans?
And these are bush beans, yep. Bush beans take about 50 to 60 days, kind of depending on the variety, but they are also what we consider a determinant. We have a bush variety of bean and a pole variety of beans, and those are typically the ones that you see often vining up, in the summertime across fences and trees and such, and they continue to produce. But with a determinant variety of green beans, they're going to all kind of come up at once, put out all their fruit at once, you harvest, and that's pretty much it.
Do you want to put them in now?
Yeah, go ahead and put them in now with the tomato. In a container this big, I might do, let's see, okay, do me 12 or so. I'll do like 3.
I think that's good.
And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see, but I'm just going to pop one in about 1 inch into the soil. And then I'd work my way around, kind of spacing it out.
And you're doing them in groups of 3, about 1 inch apart, like a triangle, 1 inch deep, and then maybe 3 or 4 inches between the triangles.
And that'll look really nice as the tomato plant begins to grow. The beans will come up, and then it's a dual purpose. I like that, especially in small spaces, that you can, get 2 harvests out of 2 different plants in one container. So the tomatoes in, the beans are in, and at this point I would water it in very deeply. And you want to make sure that when you water for the first time that you really give a deep, thorough soak so that everything can get established nicely. And you notice that I'm watering at the base of the plant and I'm not watering overhead. Now, when it rains, you really can't control that, but it's a better practice to water low so that you don't splash up any potential fungal or problems, diseases that can happen, both in container or native soil. And when you have enough water in your containers, you'll see the water running out of the bottom because there are holes that you put there. Now, we won't really be able to tell that with this, but
one of the things with watering is people always ask, how often do I have to water my plants? And not to be funny, but when they're dry, and you really have to go out and check it out. So again, we're in July. This plant's small, so maybe every 3 days, but if this plant was about this tall, you might have to do it once a day when it's 90, 95 degrees. So you always want to check the top of the soil. It always dries from the top down. So when the top couple inches is dry, you're going to have to water your tomato plants, whatever vegetables you're growing.
We call that the finger test, and you literally take your index finger and you stick it down to your second knuckle. That's about 2 inches. And if that space on your finger is dry, then you know to water. If you feel moisture, you want to wait a few more days and let that really get dry before you water again. And I've definitely come from the belief that with tomatoes, you want to water very deeply and consistently. You don't want to water deep and then wait a week and then, okay, this is dry, and you water a little bit more, and you don't even really give it a nice, thorough, deep soak.
You want to keep it thriving. So it'll survive if you do it once a week, but you're growing them to get nice production. So it's a continuous, even moisture that will help the tomato plant out. And that's the reason too, is you can't really overwater containers that have holes in them because they have holes in them. If you didn't have holes, water fills up. And the reason that you have the holes is so that the water doesn't sit in there. If your water sits in here, it's going to rot the roots and it's going to kill your plant.
All right, I can feel it in my bones, in my soul, that it's got a nice, good amount of water in there.
Should we
Now,
talk about trellising for this one?
yes. So this again is an indeterminate tomato. So at a certain point, it's going to get to a kind of flap over stage. It needs something to support it, and there's a lot of different options available to you. And I would suggest that you go to Gary's channel to take a look, because he's got so many different ways of trellising all kinds of different vegetables, and that's at the Rusted Garden.
Yep.
All right, so for this one, we are going to
Pull this out. We have the basic tomato cage. So these are kind of shallow, so it's hard sometimes to use these that are for the ground, but your basic tomato cage would just go over it. And you actually want to pull these out and push them into the side of the container. And that will give it support.
More
And
support.
Now this would be great for like the determinate variety you were talking about that gets maybe 4 feet. And it's great to start, you know, for this. But it's good to get 5 feet tall. So you may not want to use that, or you could use this one. I think we're going to put the pepper plant in here. You could drop this right into there. Or what I like to do is, let's bring this over. This is just 2 sticks. You can buy these at your big box stores. You can buy 5-foot, 6-foot poles, or you can get tree branches, and it works. And you TP it off at the top, and if you help me spread that out, you just make a TP like this, and
let it grow.
let it grow right up here, and you just tie it off to here, and this will be great support for your tomato plant.
Yeah. So one last thing for this tomato plant before I move on is that I want to talk about mulching in your containers, because that really does help to conserve moisture. And I found that when I use mulch, I don't have to water nearly as often as if I don't use mulch. So I would highly recommend it. Mulch comes in all kinds of different forms. It can be straw, it can be leaves from your backyard. I often use that because that's free. It can be wood chips, it can be literally just mulch. So we have some wood chips that we had at the farm just in a big old pile. So we're going to use that to mulch into this soil here. And you just, good 2-inch layer or so. And that is going to do wonders for helping to keep the moisture in. Now we were talking about fertilizer, granular versus water soluble. Can you kind of talk about the difference and when you would use either?
Yeah, so these plants are small, and the granular fertilizers are called slow release. So they mix in the soil biology, especially coming from your compost and stuff, break that down into a form of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium your plants can use. And it just slowly does that over a month or 2-month period. But you also have your water solubles, which means this is fish emulsion. It's a really good product to use. It's got 5% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, 1% potassium. It'll give your plants what they need. But this is immediately available to the plant. So when we pour this into here, the root system can pull it right in, and it can use it as it wants to start to grow. And I basically would make a gallon. You know, it's about a tablespoon or 2 in a gallon. I would water this in real quick with the fish emulsion, and then because it's small, maybe 4 weeks later, use the fish emulsion again. And as it gets bigger, I go from every 4 weeks to every 2 weeks with the water-soluble fertilizer.
Now, let me tell you, I'm gonna keep it real. This stuff smells. However, it's really good for the plant, so don't worry about it. Just beware that you'll want to either, wear long pants, but you mix it in and it dissipates rather quickly. Yeah.
Don't do it a day you're entertaining out on your desk.
Yeah, you smell a little fishy, but it is good stuff. So definitely, incorporate that into your feeding amount. Okay, so we've got our tomato planted, and we've got some cucumbers, and we have peppers.
Want to do the pepper real quick?
Yeah, we can do the pepper.
So the pepper plant, this is a cherry pepper. Can't tell, I don't know if it's a hot pepper, but it's a cherry
That's a
pepper.
cherry hot pepper, yep.
So it's a hot pepper. So you can get sweet peppers, you can get hot peppers. They're going to be anywhere from 3 feet to maybe 5 feet tall, but the 5-gallon bucket works perfectly well with these. And you're setting it up the same exact way. You're bringing the soil level about to there because we're going to put mulch down. And then the tomato plant, we plant it to like maybe that far down the stem. For the pepper, you just come a little bit above, or let's say a little bit above, and I just dig a hole and then drop it down so the soil level's right here.
Throw some food in there.
I mean, and just that quick, the pepper's ready to go. It has to get watered in, and we'll put some mulch on top.